My name is Patrick Farrington. My company's Farrington Building. I do high-end finished carpentry in Boston, South Shore, and Cape Cod. We're standing in an old home that was recently renovated. I did all the finish work throughout the house, and I'm going to walk you through the steps that I took to trim out this window. So our first step to trimming out this window is going to be taking out these factory supplied extension jambs. A lot of the times, especially in these older homes, the extension jambs don't come out to the face of the plaster. So I think the easiest way to do this is just to rip it out and put in a full width piece that comes out to the face of the plaster. So sounds worse than it is. Now that I got these off, I'm seeing that there's these little tabs on the window. I know that these are going to be in my way when it comes to putting in my new extension jamb. So these aren't necessary for anything that I'm going to do going forward, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut these right off. These lower ones here, I was careful to not cut too deep through the tab, just because I didn't want to penetrate through the flashing that was already installed. This sheetrock here, or this blue board and plaster here, is sticking out past my framing. So anywhere where this is sticking out as part of my prep for the window install, I want to cut it back so that I can get shimming in behind my extension jamb. If this comes out too far, I can't get a proper shim in behind the jamb here. So you'll see later on why that's important, but I'm going to go ahead and cut this out wherever it's sticking out past my framing. And then I'm also going to just peel back this spray foam wherever it's not. So I'll take that out, and then we're going to re-insulate our window. In different scenarios, you might not always have to cut back the plaster back to the framing or peel out the spray foam, but in this case, I thought it was the right thing to do. Okay, so the first bit of information I get to figuring out my window dimensions is I'll measure from the inside of the window to the inside of the window. Measure that out. So 66 3/16 is my window dimension from window jamb to inside of the window jamb. So that's the first bit of information, and that's my starting point. Then from there, I know from this point I want a 1/4 inch reveal to my extension jamb. On top of my extension jamb, I'll have a 1/4 inch reveal to my casing, and then I'll have 4.5 inch casing. My final reveal on my window stool is 1 11/16. So I go over here to capture all that information and to know that I'm accounting for each step. I go 66 3/16. Then I write in a 1/4 inch reveal, 1/4 inch reveal, 4.5 inches of casing, and then my final return 1 11/16. And I do the same thing going the opposite way. This way I know I have counted for all the measurements that I need to, and then I'll add everything up. I always try to write things, if I'm writing on the wall, I want to write where things are going to get covered. That's important. All right, so then I'll just pull out my calculator and I'll add everything up. Plus 3 divided by 16, plus 6, plus 11 divided by 16. So overall, 79 9/16. I'll write that down. The next thing I'm gonna do is mark out my reveals, and I know that's going to be 1/4 inch. So I just make this little reveal block so I can mark everything, and I go 1/4 by 1/4. I like to use this because it frees up using my combo square. Instead of using that and resetting it, I just have this. I know it's a 1/4 inch every time. I like to work off the center. So I'll mark my center. In this case, this window has this little mullion detail with this groove. I'm actually gonna have to notch around that, but this groove I verified is our center of the window. So in this case, I'll use this as my reference. Other times I would put a little mark in the center so that I can take my stool, find the center of my stool, line it up with my center mark, and then make sure that my length is appropriate for each side. Now I'm gonna get into cutting my stool. We know from the math we did earlier, our overall length of our window stool ended up at 79 9/16. So I just cut that, double check that I'm right, and then I'm gonna lay out my stool working from the center to the outside. So we know our center is 39 3/4 strong. That's half of 79 9/16, and I like to check it from both sides. So if I'm saying a measurement is strong, so 7 inches strong, for example, that means I would be marking between 7 and 7 1/16, which is also the same as saying 7 1/16 light. 39 3/4 strong. So we measured over from our center to our first reveal mark, which is to end up being 6 11/16. So I just verify it both ways. I make that mark. And then where I actually cut my stool, I want to be over 1/4 inch and then another 3/4 of an inch to account for my jamb. So I can write that in. And then I'll cut here. And before I cut anything, I always like to verify that it looks correct. So I'm just gonna take my stool over here. So I line up my center mark with the center of the window, and then I just verify that my cuts fall within the window opening and that my reveals seem to line up with my reveals. Then I'm gonna take this and I'll measure to my window, and I'm just gonna write that measurement down on here. In an old house, it's common that it's different on each side of the window. So I know that in order to get this stool tight to the window, I need to cut out 3 3/16 on this side and 3 1/8 on this side. And then I did my mitered cuts. And then I ripped down return piece, and then I did my mitered cuts. And we ended up securing this joint together using dominoes and wood glue, as well as some screws coming in from behind that you'll never see. I'm just gonna grab the dominoes. How much stuff? In this case, we're about 1/2 inch too short for our stool. We had to add a piece on the back side here. Now that's another situation where we're dealing with the framing lumber is a little bit wider than what is typically used today. We came up with a creative way to solve this problem by just adding a little bump out piece. It kind of just makes it look like it's part of the window. cutting our window returns, it's important to leave room for a scribe. So when I cut this return, I left about 3/8 of an inch or so that I can now scribe it into place and get a nice tight fit against the wall. So I added these scribe blocks on each side to make sure that I'm holding my jamb parallel to the window. And now I set my scribe to that depth, and I know I want this to be tight to the window. And that should line up with our scribe line that we made based on the width of the extension jamb. And then I take my scribe, scribe it into there. So when we cut this off, our return will be tight to the wall and the back side of our stool will be tight to the window. I tested the fit and it looked nice, so then I could continue on with my extension jambs. In order to measure these extension jambs, usually in an old house, the dimensions from the window to the plaster can vary quite a bit. So I got my dimension for the width of my extension jamb first, and then I went ahead and measured using an offcut block of the window stool, and I measured up to my reveal mark up here to get my right side vertical height of my extension jamb. I did the same thing on the left side, and in this case everything was in like within 3/16 of an inch, so I chose to rip everything to one dimension rather than cutting a bunch of tapered extension jambs. So I went ahead and ripped those, and then I put a bevel on the back side of that extension jamb that touches the window, and that just allows it to get a nice tight fit from your extension jamb to your window. Once I had everything cut, I could then assemble it. I have it shimmed out in a few spots. I don't go crazy with that because I like to be able to move my jamb and shoot it in. So now we have our stool in, our extension jambs are in, everything is all pre-assembled together. So now we get to the fun part, which is actually trimming out this window. So the first step that I'm going to do, marking out my reveals on our window extensions. So I'll go around, I'm going to measure this left side, right side, and measure across, and I'll measure for my window apron as well. In this case, I know that my window is square, so that gives me confidence that I can pre-assemble my casing on the bench. Pre-assembling it on the bench for me makes it a lot easier to work your miters nice and tight, and you're working right on top of the piece rather than up in the air in place. Whenever I can assemble on the bench, I know that it's going to give me the best product in the end. So with this decorative casing, we obviously need to miter our outside corners. For me, what I find is the best method with the setup that I have is using these Stool dominoes, which is basically just a tenon, and you use a machine that cuts a nice perfect slot. This helps strengthen your glue joint, but it also helps with alignment of the two pieces. So one of the clamps that I find very useful is this clamp, and this clamps the two pieces together. I'll use these collar clamps, which basically pinch the two pieces together through these spikes. Or I can use this, which is a pinch dog, and you actually drive this into the two pieces across your joint, and this tapered part of the piece helps, part of the pinch dog helps pull the two pieces together. So to do my miter with the Stool domino, I use these tabs, and you can actually hook the mitered piece into that tab. So I slide it down until I hit the tab, and then I drill my domino. So the tab trick works to cut my first domino, but for the second one, I'll have to lay that out, and I just use my combo square, set to where I want the domino to be, make a mark. With the domino, there's different settings. You can do loose or tight. If I'm in the same mark every time, I can go tight, tight. Now this one I leave with some slop in the domino mortise, and then that way it gives me an easier time to fit the two pieces together. And then I have one tight one and one loose one. So I know alignment wise, I'll be good with this tight one, and then this loose one is there for extra strength to hold the two pieces together. So I use this piece just so that I can put my pieces face down on the table and have them sit flat. Make sure you get a nice even coat of glue, and then put a little drop in each domino slot. Okay, so once I get the pieces together, I take my clamp. That's gonna help pull that outside corner together nice and tight. You can see the glue squeezing out. Alright. So I can pull that in as tight as I want. I'll put these two collar clamps up here to get this top part secured. And then clean up the glue. And I'll use one pinch dog down at the bottom here. I always go back, sand out what I can while the glue is still drying. Whenever I assemble my casing on the bench, I like to let it sit for at least a couple hours. It gives your joint plenty of time to cure. You know it's going to be solid when you go to install it and nothing's going to move. As I look at my miter here, all my profiles line up on this decorative casing, which it looks like they do. As I take my clamps off here too, I will also sand out my joints or any inconsistencies in the miter. This one looks pretty good, but I'll go ahead and want to make sure that all my points line up nice. Sand out any glue that's remaining that I couldn't get off with the rag. It's also a lot easier to sand your miter out on the table as well than it is up on the wall. So I try to just get it all prepped to the way I like it, and then once I put it on the wall, I just gotta nail it off and I don't need to come back to it. These clamps, they do leave these 4 little holes in the side of your casing. That's simply just gonna be filled with wood filler by the painter. And then these pinch dogs, they also leave these holes on the front of your casing as well. I try to, if I can, send a nail right through that hole. That way I'm not making 2 holes right next to each other. So it takes a little time to sand your miters down and prep them and make them look good, but I like to do anything that I can do to help the painter and make sure that the following trades have an easier time doing what they need to do. So now we're gonna go ahead, put it on the wall. Set my casing in place just one last time just to make sure that everything lines up the way I want it. So I'll set it up on my reveals. So that one looks good there, top and side. This one looks pretty good as well. So go ahead and pop this off. The plaster's just overhanging my extension jamb by a 1/16, not even. So I'm just gonna take a little bit of that plaster out so that my casing fits nice and tight to my jamb and to the wall. Just gonna outline this casing here so I know where I can drill holes. I like to drill it from the top down, just so that I know that the hole that we'll be sending my screw through comes through up into the casing. And I'm also going to go around and put a little construction adhesive on the wall to help hold my trim into the wall. What I like to do, especially on these bigger decorative casings, I will apply some wood glue to the bottom of this piece of casing so that I get a good bond between my stool and my casing. I don't mind if it squeezes out a little bit. I'll come back with a wet rag and clean it up. Press my casing into place. Have my brad gun. I'll go around and nail the inside of my casing off first. I get my casing over to the reveals, the 1/4 inch reveal lines that I set. Now I can screw the bottom of the stool into the casing. Like I said, I always nail the insides first so that I make sure I hit my reveal. And I do minimal nailing on my extension jamb so that I can still kind of move it around. Needs to be tapped up a little bit. Just take a block, tap it up, now I'm on my mark. When I'm nailing off this trim, I try to use as minimal nails as possible. It makes your work look cleaner and it's easier for the painters. There's just less problems that you could have. Here, instead of sending a nail close to my miter, I can just reuse these pinch dog holes and I know it'll hit my framing. That way I'm not making any extra nail holes around the miter. The final piece to trimming out this window is the apron. So that's the piece that goes underneath the window stool. We're lining up this edge of our casing with the outside edge of our casing above. So in order to do that, we extended our window return or the horn of the window stool to accommodate the width of the apron underneath. We thought it just gave it a more supportive look so that the window apron looks like it's supporting the casing above. Take our overall measurement for the width of our casing. I measure up at the top, so I got 76 3/16. I want to double check that I'm matching that at the bottom. And I'm pretty good there as well. Now I'm gonna go ahead and cut my apron. What we want to do with our aprons is we want to return this profile back into the wall. So in order to do that, you have to miter this and then cut another small return piece, and then we'll glue that on and assemble our window apron. So the first step to doing this is just cutting one side with a miter. Bevel my saw to 45. I want to make sure that I'm tight up against the fence and there's no debris. So I just want to just double check and see that I'm happy with that cut. I can see that there's a little bit of a saw mark here. So I'm going to go ahead and recut this. I know I have plenty of length. So I just want to make sure I get this first cut perfect. So I'm much happier with that. Now I'm measuring my casing and I know that I want this edge of my apron to line up with the casing above. So I'm gonna hook my tape on this part of the profile and measure over. And I wanna make sure that I mark on this part of the profile as well. And I wanna make sure when I cut that I'm going through that mark. When cutting these heavier, thicker casings, it's a lot of work for the saw. So what I like to do is sneak up on my mark. I'll cut it about 1/8 inch short and then I'll recut it to my final mark. So I'm just looking to make sure that my cut is smooth, it looks good, it feels good. Okay, so now I need to cut my small returns that will go on the outside of the apron. To cut my return for the opposite side. When cutting these profiles, I always like to cut from the face, pulling it back, so that way I don't have any blowout on the face of the material. Now, you can see we got a nice clean cut on each side. So now it's time to glue up our returns for our apron. So when I apply glue to my joint here, I want to make sure that I spread it nice. I get a nice even coat all the way across the face of the material. If it feels really thin, I'll add a little bit more. Just want to feel like I have a nice even coat all the way across. And then you do that to each piece. So I'll just go a nice even amount. And you want to make sure you have a little bit of glue squeeze out when you put the pieces together. As I'll use these pinch clamps again, these Collins clamps. It's easy when you're on a flat surface. I can put pressure down so that I know my tops are aligned. If there's any extra glue squeeze out, I'll clean it up as I go, and I can sand out the rest after. Once I got it all clamped up, I'll just add a couple pin nails just to make sure it's being held where I want it to. I wouldn't rely solely on the pin nails. I like to have the clamps there as well, in addition to the clamps. This apron has been set for a few hours, so now I feel comfortable taking these clamps off. I'm going to take the clamps off, sand out the joint. Pieces that you pre-assemble dry for at least an hour or two. You can let things cure as you're working on other windows, laying them out, cutting all your stock down to size. There's plenty to do as long as you have a plan. And when you're sanding these decorative profiles, you want to just make sure you maintain the integrity of these little details and not round them over or sand them out. So just careful with sandpaper that I use. On these smaller ones, I'll use 150, and I'll fold it up so that I'm not ruining that profile. I always like to prime anywhere where there's raw wood, especially on these open end grains. Just seals the material so that there's less movement over time. Now we'll take our apron over to our window, lay it down on the floor. So I'm just gonna pick some marks on the wall so that I can line up this edge of my apron with the outside of our casing. So in order to do that, I'm gonna take my combination square, butt it in, side underneath. I'll just make a mark right here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and square that down on the wall. Now I know that this mark should line up with there. I'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, and then I just like to dry fit, make sure that I'll line it up with this mark here. And I'll double check that we're good on this side. Oops, I feel good about that. Construction adhesive on this as well. That in. Get one in on this side. Switch to a smaller nail and nail this apron in up on an angle. Gets you a nice tight joint between your stool and your apron. And it's a good spot to nail because you don't really see it. Nailing in on that upper part of that cove in the profile. What's that? Not only are we aligning this edge of our apron with the outside of our casing, but we're also aligning the mitered return of our apron with the mitered return of our stool. Our miter lines up all the way down. All right, that's it. Just those 20 simple steps. Just my simple 35-step process. It's been about 6 months since we installed this trim, and you don't always get the chance to come back and see your work installed. I had that opportunity, and I'm gonna go back and look and see how everything's holding up. The miters still look nice and tight. Everything's nice and tight to the wall. The painters did a good job. I think you can learn a lot from going back and seeing your work, especially several months later, because you want to see how it holds up. I take those extra steps so that the product, one, holds up, but also turns out looking really nice in the end. I have a lot of confidence that this trim is going to hold up for years and years.